The inventory log was 3 pages long. Ambassador Veilsorn had read it 4 times. Not because it was complicated, because one line near the bottom kept pulling his eyes back, and he couldn't explain why it unsettled him more than anything else on the list. Not weapons. Not tools. Paper rectangles with faces on them. The humans had voluntarily surrendered plasma accelerators, kinetic rail systems, orbital targeting arrays, and yet every single one of them had asked, quietly, almost apologetically, whether they could keep the photographs. The Dominion had said yes. Of course. They were just pictures. Veilsorn was beginning to suspect that this had been the first mistake. The disarmament order came through official Dominion channels on a Tuesday, which was apparently a day humans considered already unpleasant by their own cultural reckoning. The timing was not intentional. The Dominion did not study human calendars, but the humans noticed, and several of them made a specific sound that their translation matrices rendered as laughter, though it contained no warmth. "Of course it's a Tuesday," said Commander Elena Vasquez, reading the transmission from the bridge of the Resolute. She didn't look angry. She looked like someone who had been expecting bad news for so long that its arrival was almost a relief. Her second officer, Lieutenant Darose, leaned over the display. "Timeline? 72 hours. Full compliance or they classify us as hostile." Vasquez set down the data slate. "Get me Veilsorn." "What are you going to tell him?" She was already walking toward the door. "That we comply." Osei stared after her. "Commander, get me Veilsorn, Dara." That was the first thing the Dominion's monitoring team logged. Full, immediate human compliance. No protest, no negotiation, no counterproposal. Every weapon system aboard every registered human vessel was powered down, cataloged, and placed under Dominion seal within 41 hours, 31 hours ahead of schedule. Veilsorn had expected theater. Defiance at minimum. Species at the bottom of the Dominion hierarchy always performed their powerlessness reluctantly because surrender was meant to feel like loss. The humans moved through the process with something that looked disturbingly like efficiency, and at the end of it, Vasquez shook his secondary hand and said, "You'll find everything in order." He had reviewed the inventory twice before he noticed what was missing. "You listed 847 crew members," he said. "Yes. Your medical data shows 847 crew members assigned to this vessel." "That's correct. And yet your original crew manifest, the one filed 18 months ago when the Resolute was commissioned, shows 851. Vasquez's expression didn't change. It had the quality of a wall that had been very carefully painted to look like a face. 4 personnel were transferred off before departure. The manifest was updated. "I see." Veilsorn checked his documents. "And the update was filed 72 hours before we received your transmission." She said it gently, as if helping him finish a sentence. "You can verify it in the routing logs." He did. It was there. Everything checked out, which was exactly the kind of verification that, in his experience, was worth absolutely nothing. The second thing the Dominion's monitoring team logged was stranger. 6 days after disarmament, a human cargo shuttle from the Resolute requested routine docking clearance at a Dominion transit station. Standard inspection, 3 officers, 15 minutes, full manifest review. The shuttle carried medical supplies, food rations, and replacement engine components. Nothing unusual, except that one of the inspectors, a junior analyst named Karath who would later request reassignment, citing psychological disturbance, noticed something about the human pilot. She was humming. Not transmitting, not communicating. Humming. A low, repetitive vocalization with no apparent function. Karath checked the behavioral databank. Humans hummed when they were content, bored, or nervous. He couldn't determine which applied. He logged it as anomalous comfort behavior and moved on. What he didn't log, what he didn't realize he had witnessed, was that the pilot's hands, resting on the control panel, bore 3 specific callus formations on the dominant hand that were entirely inconsistent with piloting a cargo shuttle. They were consistent with something else entirely. But the Dominion didn't know that yet. They were still looking at the weapons they had taken. They hadn't yet started asking about the weapons they hadn't found. They think we're disarmed, Osei said. He wasn't asking. Vasquez was in her quarters, which were small even by human standards, the walls covered in paper. Actual paper, handwritten notes, diagrams, printouts of star charts with annotations in at least 4 different handwriting styles. The photographs were there too. She had more than most. They think we're disarmed, she agreed. And you're going to let them keep thinking that? She looked at him for a long moment. What did you do before you joined the fleet, Dara? He blinked at the change of subject. My family ran a fishing operation. North Atlantic. Why? Did you ever have a fish take the bait, run with the line, and then go still? Yes. What did you do when that happened? You wait, he said slowly. You hold tension on the line. If you reel in too fast when they go still, they feel it and they run again. He stopped. If they go still, it means they're about to change direction. Vasquez turned back to her star charts. Get some sleep, Lieutenant. He left without another word. But he didn't sleep. The Dominion's assessment, formally compiled by Veilsorn's office 17 days after disarmament, reached 3 conclusions. First, humanity had complied fully and without resistance. Second, humanity posed no further military threat. Third, humanity's rapid compliance suggested a species-level psychological orientation toward institutional submission, a useful characteristic in client civilizations. All 3 conclusions were wrong. The team that compiled them would spend the next 4 years trying to understand how they had missed what was directly in front of them. The error wasn't in the data. The data was perfect. Every weapon they'd cataloged was real. Every serial number matched. The inventory was, as Vasquez had promised, entirely in order. The error was in what they had decided to count. What the Dominion understood about weapons. They were objects. Tools with defined functions. You cataloged them, you controlled them, you neutralized the threat. What the Dominion did not understand, what no species that had not survived the specific crucible of Earth's evolutionary history could fully internalize, was that humanity had never organized its survival around objects. It had organized its survival around people. Specifically, around what people were willing to do to each other, for each other, and because of each other, when the situation became desperate enough that the objects stopped mattering. The 4 crew members missing from the original manifest were real. They had genuinely transferred off the Resolute before departure. Vasquez had not lied about a single verifiable fact. She had simply failed to mention that the transfer orders had been her idea, that she had handpicked those 4 individuals from 1,200 volunteers, and that transfer was not the word she used with them privately. The word she used privately was deployment. Veilsorn received the first report from the monitoring team on the 23rd day. He read it standing up. He remained standing for a long time after. The report documented 6 separate incidents across 3 different Dominion transit corridors, a rerouted shipping channel, a communication relay offline for 11 hours, a survey drone that returned with 17 minutes of missing data, and a lens that had been deliberately, precisely, professionally cleaned. No fingerprints. No residue. No evidence of tampering beyond the absence of what should have been there. Absence. The weapon was absence. They have operatives in the field, said his senior analyst. Assets embedded before disarmament. How many? We can't determine that. Approximate. The analyst's mouth moved, but he clearly hadn't expected to be pushed. The rerouting of the shipping channel alone required coordination at a minimum of, the math suggests, no fewer than. He stopped. We don't know how many. We don't know how they're communicating. We can't find the communication. Veilsorn thought about the photographs. He thought about 847 soldiers who had each quietly asked whether they could keep them. Pull all surveillance on human crew members across every Dominion-adjacent station, he said. Not their equipment. I want you watching their asterisk faces. Their faces? Humans show things in their faces. I want to know what they're not showing. What followed was a masterclass in a discipline the Dominion had no name for. They would eventually borrow the human term, though they used it with a discomfort they couldn't fully articulate. The human term was hope, but not hope as a passive state. Hope as an operational framework. Vasquez's 4 operatives, later confirmed as 6, then 9, then a number the Dominion never definitively established, were not soldiers in any format the Dominion's classification system recognized. They carried no weapons. They issued no communications on detectable frequencies. They moved through Dominion infrastructure with the particular invisibility of people who had learned, at a genetic and cultural level, that survival required you to look like you belonged somewhere even when you didn't. They were, the Dominion's analysts eventually concluded, doing something the Dominion's military doctrine had no category for. They were waiting. And while they waited, they were learning. Every transit route, every shift change, every location where a Dominion system's confidence in itself created a blind spot. It doesn't make tactical sense, the senior analyst told Veilsorn. They're not activating. They're not sabotaging. They're just watching, said Veilsorn. Yes. And you find that less threatening than if they were sabotaging. A long pause. I did. Initially. And now. Another pause, longer. I would prefer they were sabotaging. On the 31st day, Vasquez requested a formal meeting with Veilsorn. The request was polite, procedural, offered through proper channels, and included a proposed agenda that was almost insultingly mundane: review of disarmament compliance timeline, discussion of civilian shipping resumption, exchange of updated crew rosters. Veilsorn accepted. He also spent 2 hours before the meeting reviewing everything his team had on her. She arrived precisely on time. Humans were punctual when it mattered, he had learned, and irregular when they wanted you to miscount them, and she sat across from him with her hands folded and that same painted wall expression. "Ambassador," she said. "Commander Vasquez." He decided to skip the preamble. "How many operatives do you have in the field?" She didn't blink. "I'm not sure I understand the question." "I think you understand it perfectly. With respect, Ambassador, you disarmed us. You reviewed our inventory. You have surveillance across every Dominion corridor where human ships operate. If there were operatives in the field, you would have found them. We found evidence of them." "Evidence of what, specifically?" He spread his hands. "Absence. Things that should be present that are not." She nodded slowly, as if he had said something reasonable. "A difficult thing to bring charges on." "I'm not bringing charges. I'm asking you to tell me the truth." For the first time, something moved behind her eyes. Not fear. Not guilt. Something older than both. "Here's the truth, Ambassador." She leaned forward slightly. "You asked us to disarm. We disarmed. Every weapon you cataloged, every system you sealed, it sealed. We haven't violated a single term." She paused. "The question you should be asking isn't whether we have operatives in the field. The question is what you're going to do about a species that can lose every weapon in its arsenal and still be more dangerous to you than the day before the order came through." Silence. "That's the truth," she said. "And I think, on some level, you already knew it when you made us comply." The full scope of it became clear over the next 9 days, and it arrived not in one dramatic moment but in layers, each one revealing that the layer beneath was deeper than previously believed. The missing 4 crew members, eventually confirmed as 11, had spent 31 days doing nothing overtly threatening. But they had mapped, in granular detail, the entire operational blind structure of Dominion infrastructure across 6 sectors. They had identified 42 points where a single coordinated action would cascade into systemic failure. They had done this without any equipment the Dominion had prohibited, using only tools the Dominion had never thought to list. Memory, observation, handwritten notes on paper no sensor was looking for, and the particular human capacity for constructing sophisticated plans out of components so mundane that no threat assessment algorithm would flag any of them individually. When Veilsorn's team finished mapping what the humans had mapped, the senior analyst sat very still for a while before speaking. "They weren't building an attack," he said finally. "No," said Veilsorn. "They were building an asterisk demonstration." "Yes. They wanted us to find it." Veilsorn thought about the meeting, about the way Vasquez had leaned forward, the slight, controlled precision of "I think you already knew." "She told me directly," he said quietly. I didn't understand what I was being told. The demonstration was this: humanity did not need weapons. Weapons were a courtesy, a concession to civilizations that needed objects to understand threat. The actual threat, the one that could not be catalogued or sealed or placed under Dominion authority, was the humans themselves. Their capacity to observe, to adapt, to endure the specific psychological weight of doing nothing while waiting for the correct moment. And to do all of this with 11 people and some paper and the bone-deep certainty that patience was not passivity. The photographs. Each one was a person they were doing this for. Veilsorn transmitted his recommendation to the Dominion High Assembly on the 40th day. He recommended lifting the disarmament order. He recommended formal renegotiation of humanity's position within the Dominion hierarchy. He attached his full evidence log and a personal note that was unusually short for a document of such consequence. It read, "We made an error in our fundamental categorization. We classified humans as a military threat and responded to the category. We should have classified them as something the Dominion has not encountered before and does not have a category for. I am not certain creating one will help, *. He also attached a translation note about the word hope, not the passive definition, the operational one. Vasquez received the notification of the lifted order on a Tuesday. She looked at the display for a long moment. Then she made that sound again, the one with no warmth in it that the translation matrices called laughter. Osei looked up from his station. Good news. They're giving us our weapons back. And? She set the display down, reached up and straightened the photograph pinned above her console. A woman, older, same eyes, standing in front of something green that might have been a coastline. And they think that's what we wanted, she said. Osei was quiet for a moment. Was it? She didn't answer that. She didn't need to. Because the Dominion, in 40 days of surveillance, had captured 2,300 hours of footage of human crew members doing ordinary things, eating, sleeping, working, humming, looking at photographs, and in all of it, not one of them had ever looked like people who were waiting to get their weapons back. They had looked, consistently, unmistakably, like people who had already decided how this ended and were simply moving through the remaining steps. That footage would be studied for years. And the conclusion, the one that got written into every Dominion briefing on humanity from that point forward, the one that made ambassadors go quiet when they read it and military strategists request reassignments and philosophers in 3-star systems start asking questions they didn't have language for, was this. The weapons had never been the arsenal. The arsenal was the willingness. The staggering, patient, apparently bottomless human willingness to give up everything that could be taken and continue. Not because they were the strongest species in the galaxy, but because every other species, when it lost everything it could hold in its hands, eventually stopped. Humanity looked at empty hands and started counting what was left. They were always still counting.